Hello and welcome to this eSchool News webinar highlighting the FBI's perspective on cybersecurity and K-12 education. My name is Dennis Pierce and I'll be moderating the event. I'm the former editor of eSchool News and I'm now a freelance education writer and consultant, and I'm very pleased to have you join us for what should be a really informative session. Today's webinar is sponsored by Aruba, a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise company. Aruba is a leading provider of next-generation networking solutions for school systems of all sizes. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to take a minute to just go over some of the features of the platform that we'll be using. This event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Within a few days of the event, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the purple Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, typing your question into the pop-up box, and then hitting submit. We'll save those questions for a Q&A session with our presenters at the end of the webinar. We also have a group chat function that you can launch by clicking on the blue chat button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to use this feature to chat among yourselves or to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you have a technical question. But please don't use this feature to ask the panelists questions. If you have a question for one of the speakers, then you should use the Q&A box that I just mentioned. If you find that you're having a hard time reading the text on the slides, you can enlarge that portion of your screen by clicking on the box in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or you can click on the double arrows for a full screen view of the slide presentation. And finally, we encourage you to join the back channel conversation on Twitter by referencing the Twitter handle @Aruba Networks and the hashtag ESNWebinar in your tweets. And Aruba has made a few resources available for you to download as well. You can find those in the additional resources box in the lower left side of your screen. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our presentation. Our speakers today are Elaine Shuck and Robin Witty from Aruba, and we're also very excited to have Special Agent Christopher Thomas from the FBI. Elaine Shuck is the Senior Manager of Vertical Marketing for Aruba. Over her 25-plus-year career, she's brought stimulating and engaging digital learning opportunities to K-12 schools and higher ed institutions. Her work ranges from global hands-on demonstrations for educators to facilitating hybrid solutions that enhance education and training. Robin Witty is a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Aruba with more than 15 years' experience in cybersecurity and wireless technologies. At Aruba, Robin is responsible for user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic analysis, Internet of Things security, and the broader Aruba security portfolio. And Supervisory Special Agent Christopher Thomas is a 16-year veteran of the FBI. Chris has worked within the Bureau's cyber program for most of his career, and he now serves as supervisor of the FBI Sacramento Division's Computer Intrusion and Digital Forensic programs. Beginning things today will be Elaine Shuck from Aruba. So Elaine, I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Hello and welcome to our webinar today. Switch the slide here. Today I'm going to take a few minutes to just talk about the K-12 campus. The edge is where the people are, where the actions take place, where people work, learn, visit, and go. The places at the edge are familiar to us. There are workplaces, schools, stores, hotels, hospitals, and factories. New experiences are being created in these places, experiences that bring the digital world into our physical world around us. Delivering smart digital experiences by blending mobile, cloud, and IoT devices deliver amazing experience to our customers, our guests, and employees in every place at the edge. While the basic structure of elementary and secondary schools remain the same, what's changed is the massive infusion of technology. Students want mobile and digital learning, staying connected, whether it's in or out of the classroom. Schools are becoming dependent on technology and sophisticated IT systems for teaching, learning, and school operations. The number of K-12 students with access to broadband needed for digital learning grew 4 million in 2013 to 44.7 million in 2018. Here are some of the ways that we're using this bandwidth. School telephone systems are migrating to voice over IP services. Point of sale systems are deployed in school cafeterias. HVAC and lighting controls are centrally managed via IP networks. Student information systems offer real-time insights to administrators, teachers, and parents. Internet-connected surveillance cameras are being deployed in the name of school safety. And school district human resource offices manage hiring, payroll, and benefits via online portals. When it comes to IT security for students at K-12 institutions, there are many factors to consider. Online assessments, web-based learning tools, and mobile devices are driving the future of education. When you look at the number of tools that have moved to cloud-based software and the increase of mobile device adoption in classrooms, it's easy to see why you need a solution to help manage students using the internet on these devices. As that number continues to grow, so does the need for increased focus on programs that teach digital citizenship skills. Classrooms are shifting away from the rows of desks to an environment that promotes collaboration between students, teachers, and other devices. It's what we are calling smart digital spaces. It's a classroom that supports learning with one-on-one initiatives and project-based learning. It provides anytime, anywhere access to cloud-based apps like Google, Quizlet, Zoom, Office 365, and many, many more. It's a classroom that easily provides guest access and student collaboration while also being able to prioritize critical learning apps such as online assessments. We see the Internet of Things becoming more deeply embedded in our education environment. We may begin to hear the term itself used less frequently as it becomes part of our everyday life. Today, online environments offer exciting possibilities, that's for sure, one that requires students to be educated on cyber safety and their responsibility. Teachers and students need to know the cybersecurity risks this may introduce. Ultimately, the goal of K-12 stakeholders must be to reduce and better manage the cybersecurity risks facing increasingly technology-dependent schools. Keeping K-12 schools cyber secure is a serious problem, one that is sure to get worse unless we take steps to address it. So I would like to share some recent stats. So sales of mobile PCs in the K-12 space was 6.5 million in 2018. IoT devices in education is expected to be 11.3 billion by 2023. And IT spending due to cloud adoption will be at 3.8 trillion by 2019. Before I pass this to our next presenter, I wanted to share this last slide. In 2018, there were 122 publicly disclosed cybersecurity incidents affecting 119 public K-12 schools across 38 states. With statistics like this, the question educators need to ask is what threats and vulnerabilities might students and teachers be facing, and how well prepared are school leaders to manage these new risks? An external firewall alone isn't enough. Inside threats are real. I would like to introduce Special Agent Christopher Thomas to talk about cybersecurity in the K-12 space. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. And hi, everyone. I'm Chris Thomas with the FBI, and thank you to Aruba for inviting me to participate in this webinar. So today I'm going to carve out what the FBI's lane in the road is for cyberspace, how to work with the FBI. I'm going to try and address the cyber threat landscape. There's a lot to discuss there, so I'm going to hit more so on the wave tops, really of the major threats that are likely targeting education technology in K-12. And then I'll wrap it up with some prevention measures to help protect yourselves and your organizations. Before I begin, I just want to start off with our legal disclaimer, just to highlight that many of the views and opinions in this presentation are are personal to me, do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. government. At the same time, some of the advice that I provide in here should not be considered as legal advice, so therefore just be mindful of that, and of course do not sue me or the FBI. And then, although this presentation is being recorded, I just ask if you do want to cite any references from my presentation that you please check with me first. All right, so the lanes in the road. There's a lot of confusion sometimes regarding the role of government in cybersecurity at many levels, at the state and local and federal. There's a lot of players in the game. At the federal level, you have DHS and FBI and Secret Service operating in different lanes. But I wanted to highlight that about 3 years ago, the federal government finally created their first incident response plan for critical cyber incidents. And in that response plan, they designated the Department of Justice and the FBI as the lead agency for threat response, which means we have primary jurisdiction to conduct investigations and lead disruption efforts. Now, it doesn't mean that role is exclusive. We still partner with our with other federal agencies and local partners when appropriate. But if and when there's a critical cyber incident, that is our role as the lead for such incidents. Also part of this response plan is DHS. They are the lead for asset response, which means threat neutralization, providing technical assistance to affected entities to protect their assets and reduce the impact of cyber incidents if and when they do happen. Not pictured here on the slide is the ODNI, Office of Director of National Intelligence, and quite simply it's their job to ensure information is being facilitated at all levels during a critical incident, both through the government and the private sector. So jumping into what the FBI does, just to be clear, if and when there is a critical incident, we don't come in, we don't take over your systems, nor do we repair them. Neither do we share critical information with stakeholders such as your board members and city council, nor do we provide information to the media. In fact, doing so usually impacts our ability to do our job. But the benefit of working with us is that it's useful to have us in pocket before a critical cyber incident. It makes the coordination a lot easier. We can share information that helps you understand the threats that are targeting you and your organizations. We can have a bilateral information exchange where we provide feedback on indicators of compromise that you might find during the course of your duties. If and when there is a critical cyber incident, we can always bring a number of government resources to your assistance, and the benefit is it doesn't cost you one dime. But overall, we incorporate our victim-centric approach to develop the best approach together for remediating the threats and disrupting the actors. One of the mechanisms that we use for that is information sharing. We've gotten a lot better at this in recent years. We produce a lot of products such as flash messages, which are FBI liaison alert system reports, pins, and private sector messages. And these products they allow us to take our actual case data and share threat indicators, tactics, techniques, and procedures by the actors, and malware signatures to potential victims. This information helps to protect other companies and organizations from being victimized. And it's all done without divulging the identity of the victim. And I believe there is a resource available to you during this webinar. It's in the resource section. There's a private industry notification, which highlights the threats that are targeting the educational technology and the vulnerabilities of network devices, and some recommendations you can use to protect your students and your data. Please feel free to share this with your colleagues and administrators. So jumping into the threat landscape here, I love this quote here. This is from Cedric Clayton, a retired deputy director of the NSA. And what he's saying here is not that every company and organization in the U.S. has been hacked, but rather if they haven't had the hard experience of a cybersecurity breach, which then caused them to beef up their cybersecurity in a major way, then they probably don't have enough to protect them right now. The reality is every time we connect to the internet, we increase our vulnerability. Information security is a continuous process because the attack vectors change all the time. So just to kind of paint a picture for the cost of cybercrime, the global cost of cybercrime is estimated to be between $600 billion and I've heard as high as $2 trillion per year. And the average time to identify a data breach is more than 6 months. That's really concerning. And it's even worse is the time to contain the breach is more than 2 months. The average cost per data breach is about $4 million for large institutions and organizations. For smaller ones, it's probably between $500,000 to $2 million. Now, that number includes the cost of incident response, legal fees, credit monitoring, lost business, and impact on reputation. The cause of data breaches themselves, about 2/3 of them were linked to human error. And what's concerning here is those are simply just misconfigured cloud storage servers, databases, network, and backup gear. The other 1/3 of those data breaches are attributed to phishing attacks, where the actor gains direct network access by convincing employees to wire money or use compromised credentials to deploy malware and ransomware. I call this slide the threat actor landscape. I just want to highlight 2 of them that are likely targeting K through 12. One is the criminal actors. These are actors that are often just looking to seek data, including credit card data, personal health information, or personally identifying information that can be monetized quickly. And the second one will be hacktivism. These are the social activists that aim to promote a social or political cause through hacking. These are the 2 groups most likely to target the K through 12 environments. So why target the educational technology? So EdTech is what we call the use of technology to facilitate learning and data management. But actors are likely to target these environments because they realize that there is a latency between identifying and reporting cyber incidents to law enforcement, which then limits our ability to investigate them. They also know that you have limited funding and resources, and the reality is some district personnel, they lack cybersecurity expertise to negotiate terms of service agreements. And what I mean here is understanding privacy policies, accountability provisions, and liability provisions that would affect your data and your students. And then I mentioned earlier the financial gain. Just for awareness, complete credit card information with billing address, PIN, date of birth, and social security number runs about $50 out there on the internet right now in the dark web and in other hacking forums. And medical records run about $50 as well per record. Some of the vulnerabilities that we've seen in past years, I'm not going to do a deep dive into the case studies, but I wanted to highlight these events have happened in the last couple of years, and they really give resonance to the threat targeting the K through 12 environment. In the first example, the hackers used the data to contact, extort, and threaten students with violence and release of personally identifying information. And the actors sent text messages to the parents, local law enforcement, and posted student information on social media explaining how the release of such info could help child predators. In the third example, the records were exposed after parents entered their own student's ID into the app, which then revealed the student information for all of the students in that district, including their name and bus stop locations. Obviously, that could be exploited and used by individuals with bad intentions. In the fourth example, that information actually was hacked, and it was available on the dark web for about $1,000 on the Hansa dark web marketplace. Unfortunately, the cost of remediation were much higher than what the actor was looking to gain from that effort. So I just want to cover a couple of the major threats that we are seeing that are affecting K through 12 as well as all industrial sectors, but ransomware is one of them. Hopefully by now you all have heard of this and you are aware of it, but have not been impacted by this. But for those of you that haven't heard about it, I'll just say briefly that ransomware is a form of malware that blocks access to a computer system and its data, holding its data hostage against its user by demanding ransom for its restoration. There are literally hundreds of variants of ransomware out there. to include WannaCry, CryptLocker, CryptoWall, and so many others. And you can buy your own kit on the dark web for as little as $200. Typical infection methods include clicking on malicious phishing email links and visiting infected websites. After a user does so, usually all files on a local and attached drives are encrypted and effectively locked away from the user. The criminal notifies the victim they must pay a ransom in order to receive a digital key and retrieve their files. So the question we often get asked is, should I pay the ransom? Well, paying the ransom does not guarantee the victim will receive the encryption key, and officially we don't advocate paying the ransom because really it emboldens the adversary. And in fact, we've seen individuals or organizations that were never provided decryption keys after having paid a ransom. However, we understand that when you are faced with an inability to function, you must evaluate all options to protect your students and your data. How do you protect yourself? So really the best thing you can do here is maintain backups. Maintain the integrity, maintain them offline, but really that's the best way to recover your critical data. And if and when you do have an infection, it's important to isolate the computer and take it offline so it does not infect all local and attached drives. If and when you do suffer an infection, there are some resources out there. The No More Ransom Project, which is a collaboration between Europol and several European police agencies to share the decryption keys for ransomware variants that have been identified and successfully decrypted. Again, our position is we don't advocate paying the ransom for the reasons I described earlier. However, we do ask that you do let us know if and when you do suffer an infection, because if you don't, we don't know it's a problem unless you tell us. So please use the IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, which I will mention again later, to report those incidents. So at least we can help to prioritize these events in our case priorities. Moving on to business email compromise. This is a $12 billion scam targeting companies that perform wire transfers, and more recently, HR and payroll professionals that maintain employee data. The main attack vectors are using spoofed or faked emails, or compromising legitimate email accounts through social engineering or computer intrusion techniques. Victims are often monitored and studied prior to initiation of the wire transfer, as the actors know who to target and when to execute wire transfers in certain environments. We've identified overall 5 different types of this scam. One is the account compromise, where the employee email is hacked, not spoofed, and the payment invoices are sent to multiple contacts in the contact list. The second example of the bogus invoice is where the fraudster changes the payment info for the invoice. We've seen a large amount of targeting, mostly in real estate. However, we have seen several attempts in the K-12 environment, even in the last few months in our local area here. The CEO fraud is where the executive's email is hacked or spoofed, and just last month we had a reporting of a superintendent of a local school district who was being targeted. And oftentimes what the actors will do is they will wait till that executive is going to be unavailable, maybe they're traveling or they're in a meeting, and they will send an urgent email to a subordinate trying to direct a wire transfer to an account maintained by the actor. The fourth option, the data theft. More recently, we've seen a lot of this where they are targeting employees who maintain W-2s and PII. And moreover, we've seen it used directly to file false tax returns on behalf of those individuals. And then the last one we see a little bit more of, it isn't too common, but where they will impersonate a lawyer, and they will be used to help to facilitate a fraudulent transaction by conveying to the employee of the organization they're negotiating a deal on behalf of an executive in the organization. So that's a brief overview on business email compromise. How can you protect yourself? Really, the best way is to implement a 2-factor verification process for all information technology, financial, and business procedures. Don't let one person be the single point of failure here. And if and when you are the recipient of an email that seems rather suspicious, use out-of-band communications to confirm the transaction. Don't email back. Rather, call the person. Ask John or Bill, hey, did you mean to send this email and ask me to wire a certain amount of funds? And then be cautious with social media. Oftentimes we see employees are targeted because of rather prominent profiles that they maintain on social media, like LinkedIn and elsewhere, where they have the company email addresses and phone numbers. So be mindful of what you post on social media at the personal level. And if and when you are the recipient of them, again, just use good judgment, slow down, inspect the details, the amounts, and justification, and think hard about executing the transfer before you do so. So Elaine touched briefly on IoTs. I just wanted to talk briefly about this, that for those of you that maybe aren't familiar, IoTs are the buzz term for any gadget, appliance, or device connected to the Internet that can communicate with other devices without human intervention. These are the smartwatches, the smart thermostats, smart TVs, the webcams in the K-12 environment. We have a number of these devices. I think Elaine mentioned about 11 billion of these, or 11 million. Well, that number is expected to double, is my understanding, in the K-12 environment and even outside. These are very popular right now, so it's important that we think closely about really how to protect ourselves if and when we do use these devices, both at home and in the K-12 environment. I think the first thing we need to think about is whether there's an actual need and purpose. They're great, they're convenient, but do we really need them? And if you do need them, make sure you change the default password. Oftentimes, this can create a lot of problems because the hackers will post the default passwords, and they will on the internet, and they will use those for botnets, and that can be used for malicious terms, which obviously could impact you and your organization and your students. And if you do have IoTs on your network, isolate them, put them on their own VLAN, but don't let that create a vulnerability to other parts of your network that maintain sensitive data. Make sure you update the security patches and purchase from reliable manufacturers. Getting a good deal online from a vendor in China may not be such a good deal if, in fact, it is riddled with vulnerabilities. So just some things to think about there. And some prevention measures here. So this list isn't meant to be complete, but these are some good ones to think about. The first four that are highlighted in blue, whitelisting, patching, and restricting admin privileges. The Australian Signals Directorate claimed that if you do those four things, you'll be able to mitigate at least 85% of the intrusions targeting your organization. Multi-factor authentication, hopefully you're all using it, but implementing two-factor access on webmail, VPNs and accounts and other critical systems. Data classification, really what we're referring to here is identifying the crown jewels on your system and take steps to protect them. Ensure the most sensitive data remains protected if an attack were to happen. Data encryption, whether it's at rest or in transit, if it's encrypted, it's useless to the bad guys. If you can do so, I highly recommend it. I mentioned earlier the backups as it relates to ransomware, critically important. And select password resets on critical accounts, as I mentioned, VPN, admin, and so forth. And then the reason why we're all here is continuous user awareness training. So wrapping up, if you do have a critical incident, you can always report that to CyWatch. That's our 24/7 command post. We maintain resources there around the clock. If you need help or if you need guidance, they will route your request based on where you are located to the nearest FBI field office, whether it's myself or my designee. We will together respond and develop a response that helps you and your organization. However, for the more routine stuff, you can use IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, to log the more routine complaint. If you've been phished but you were able to deflect it, please do so. To file a report, let us know who it was and as many details as you can. We may roll into a larger pending case that we already have. And then that concludes my portion of the presentation. At this point, I'm going to pass to Robin Witty.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. So hi, everybody. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about overall cybersecurity and also about security at Aruba. So for those entrusted to really keep organizations up and running while keeping customers and employees secure, it really does require constant vigilance with always-on cybersecurity, The attack surface is expanding with BYOD, IoT, cloud, and mobile. And attacks and attackers can be sophisticated, organized, and very well resourced. So fortunately, there are both traditional and modern strategies and tools to help our network and security teams enable and secure their organizations, including for K-12. So in this segment, we'll explore some of them. So I'd like to start by looking at the why and how of cyber threats and how they happen in K-12. Chris did a great job outlining some of them, but just to kind of prepare us for what's coming, I'd like to just bring up a couple of other topics. So examples of what's valuable to cyber criminals in K-12 include that PII, so that personally identifiable information, and that can be information about administrators, faculty, staff, students, parents, and it can include things like Social Security numbers, birth dates, home address, email address, driver's license number, employment history. It can also include the health and insurance records. And these are some of the most valuable in the black market because they're very difficult to change, unlike a credit card number, which is relatively easy to change. And they begin to give a more complete picture of an individual. And the more information on an individual, it's called a full package, and there's some slang around that as well, that is more valuable than a single piece of data. Additionally, as Chris had mentioned, financial and payments, so that would include banking data, credit card numbers, or scammed payments. So it's important to understand what they're going after to be sure that we take extra steps to secure those crown jewels of information. So if that's the type of information that cyber criminals want, where do cyber threats come from? So threats can come from unknowing yet compromised insiders where valid credentials are being used. They can also come from malicious or negligent insiders. And insiders can be, for example, employees, partners, guests, teachers, parents, and students. Outsiders get in through techniques such as phishing and malware, ransomware, exploiting vulnerabilities. These are things that Chris had mentioned. And these can be very targeted, like advanced targeted attacks, or opportunistic. And another source of threats is technology, such as unsecured wire ports in a library, for example, IOT devices and sensors, point-of-sale systems, and IP-enabled systems such as HVAC or lighting systems that are connected. So Chris mentioned that attack vectors are changing all the time and that once an organization has been compromised, it can take days, weeks, and months to discover and contain it. Another related stat is that it can take minutes or less to actually execute a compromise. So given that, both defending at the perimeter with things like firewalls and endpoint protection, for example, as well as securing from the inside are important areas to address. Aruba, as a networking vendor, has built security into our products since the earliest days of the company. And we have a really deep understanding of the network and understand that there are thousands of aspects of metadata that can be used to optimize and secure the network. Internally, we call this network-powered security. So as a strategy, Aruba approaches it in three ways. Securing the network. That means to protect the physical infrastructure and the network traffic. Securing access. That means knowing who and what is accessing the network and controlling their access to network resources before giving access. The last area is securing the inside. That means having granular visibility of what's happening on the network and detecting and responding to threats using technologies such as AI-based technology. So let's take a high-level view of these three aspects. The first is secure infrastructure. So Aruba has long been a market leader in secure wired and wireless networking. Gartner is one of the top analyst firms, and we've been a market leader there for the last 13 years. And so the reason why is Aruba, built into our access points, controllers, routers, et cetera, are technologies that includes security, such as secure boot. So that's built into access points to help ensure that these access points, which may or may not be behind locked doors, haven't been tampered with or switched out, for example. Another area is wireless intrusion prevention. So that's software that's embedded that detects rogue devices or unauthorized networks connecting or connected to a wireless network. We also have things like military-grade encryption, and having that encryption and decryption done in the controllers in the locked data center instead of in the open area access points, and things like dynamic segmentation, being able to segment the traffic with a policy enforcement firewall. So if you'd like to get more information about the infrastructure capabilities, you can actually go to arubanetworks.com, including the homepage, and you can sign up to get a copy of your own version of the Gartner Magic Quadrant and the Critical Capabilities Report for more information. The next area is secure access. So it's securing access to the network and network resources. At a high level, here's how Aruba ClearPass would secure access. The first is visibility, to be able to see all users, devices, and IoT as they're trying to connect and are connected on wired, wireless, and remote networks. Next, it's important to authenticate and authorize before letting anything on the network. This is really a zero trust approach, because if compromises can take minutes or less to happen, it's really best to verify before letting users and devices on the network. So after they're authenticated and authorized, it's important to profile the devices and users, knowing where and how and with what type of device they're accessing the network. So for example, are they on a school-issued or a personal device? Are they on campus or at a coffee shop? And then what we do with all of this information is to give access based upon very specific preset policies. And we give access to what they're approved to access based upon where and when and how and what device and other criteria. The next, one more thing. So some of the key benefits here are really, I'll go back one second. Are really knowing who and what is on your network at all times, knowing all the users and devices are authenticated and authorized before they get on the network, and then controlling access based upon very granular and policy-based controls. The third area is securing from the inside. So traditional security solutions typically focus on the perimeter, and they look to stop things that they know are bad, like malware. And of course, this is definitely still needed. Yet, if many breaches are carried out with compromised credentials, and those credentials are stolen, and if nobody knows that, they get through those traditional security controls. In one industry study, 80% of advanced attacks use compromised credentials. So how can organizations detect and stop things if they don't know they're bad, like compromised credentials or new, never-before-seen malware or polymorphic malware that changes to evade detection? So Aruba Introspect actually looks for these types of threats and attacks, and it uses AI-based machine learning and advanced analytics applied to behavior. So if you think about it, attackers can modify malware to evade detection with traditional tools, yet it's more difficult to modify malware to spot small changes in behavior, and to understand what that means really requires sophisticated technology. So with Introspect, all the mature AI-based technology is there, yet it's either self-learning or it's within expertly built attack models. So what that means to you is you get that deep AI expertise without necessarily having to have it yourself. It's already built into the solution. So at a high level, let's look at how Introspect works. It looks at behavior of users, devices, IoT, servers, anything with an IP address, as well as by peer group. The next area is really the monitoring and the advanced analytics. First, it continuously monitors behavior. It learns on its own what is normal and what is not, using what's called unsupervised machine learning. If the system just sent out alerts on abnormal behavior, the security and networking teams would be getting a lot of unnecessary alerts. So in addition to these behavioral analytics, Introspect has attack analytics and attack models built in. This is using trained or supervised machine learning. Some of those attack models that are built in, for example, are account compromise, command and control, data exfiltration, lateral movement, privilege escalation, and ransomware. So as Introspect sees anomalous and/or attack behavior, it assesses the entire risk into a single risk score, and that helps security teams prioritize what to address first. Then, incidents are investigated using a risk profile, which has all the data in context with actionable insights in a single profile for the incident, all the way down to the network packet level. Then when responsive action is needed to be taken or is orchestrated, it's done in a number of ways, either automatically based on policies or through human interaction. So for example, if a device was initiating a command and control action, so it's phoning home to the bad guys to get instructions, if it were a heart pump, you wouldn't want to disconnect it from the network automatically. Yet, if it was a printer at 3 a.m., you might want to automatically, based on policies, take it off the network until the incident could be investigated. The key benefits to an integrated UEBA, user and entity behavior analytics, it's a long name, and network traffic analysis, NTA solution like Introspect is you know what's happening on your network at all times. You have the ability to detect, prioritize, investigate, and respond to hidden threats and attacks that all your other security solutions have missed, right? It's already gotten inside. And your goal is to do that quickly before any big damage is done. So this is really an adaptive security approach where you look at trust and risk and you continuously assess that within the context of what's actually happening on the network. So you already have security solutions in place. And at Aruba, it's always been important for our network and security solutions to work with other IT network and security solutions. That way, these solutions can work better together to give you a stronger security posture. So, for example, IoT devices and sensors are increasingly being incorporated into organizations, and sometimes without the network or security teams knowing about it. So IoT devices, as you already heard, are inherently secure, and they really deserve special attention. In 2017, Aruba did a study, and 56% had implemented IoT, and 84% had already experienced an IoT breach. And you don't tend to hear about that very often. Last summer, Poneman and Aruba did a survey which showed that 77% said that IoT posed a threat to their organization's overall security, and 67% said they have little to no ability to secure their IoT. And that survey actually is available on the Aruba website. So the Aruba infrastructure, ClearPass, and Introspect all have unique features and solutions that address IoT discovery, profile, and security if you're interested in learning more. But these are the types of new modern security solutions and networking solutions that are working with the new types of technologies that are being brought on board today. So I'll close with a couple of real-world examples with Aruba security solutions to kind of illustrate some of the topics I've already talked about. So IoT devices, one K-12 school found out that they had this out-of-commission refreshment sign in their cafeteria, which, it was still plugged in and they weren't using it. They found out it had been hacked by using an Aruba security solution, and that it was communicating out to over 100 countries, and it was still connected to the network, of course. So they quickly took it off the network the old-fashioned way. They unplugged it. In a type of technology that is a little bit more complex, and that's kind of the topic of polymorphic malware. One individual computer at a K-12 school got infected with polymorphic malware. Again, that's the type that changes to evade detection. And it started to spread. With Aruba and other security solutions, it was detected, investigated, and stopped within a few hours. There was actually a neighboring school district that had a similar issue, and it took them a few weeks and a lot more work and stress to be able to address it. There's actually a K-12 blog on the Aruba website if you want more information. So in closing, security is evolving from mainly those traditional perimeter-based strategies and tools to adding more focus on detection and response and the continuous assessment of risk. And it's really an exciting time with K-12. K-12 is undergoing a digital transformation, expecting more devices, more data, more interconnectivity, and more uses for technology to enable better learning outcomes and operation. And networking and security are really key in this transformation. So this will give us an opportunity to really be ready by taking some of the things that you've learned during the session today and thinking about whether or not it will work in your environment. So thank you very much. At this point, I am going to turn it back over to Dennis.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks to all of our presenters. You've given us all a lot to think about there. I want to remind everybody that if you have any questions for the presenters, you can still use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Before we get into the question and answer session, I also just want to remind everybody that you will be getting an email within the next few days that has a recording of this presentation and a copy of the slides. So all the information in there, the FBI Cywatch email and phone number, you'll receive that in the follow-up email. As we get into Q&A, I have a couple quick questions one quick question and then a more involved question for Chris. You mentioned at the outset of your presentation you referred to a certain resource. Can you say again what that is and where people can find that?
Yes, absolutely. So periodically we publish private industry notifications, and this is based on our own analysis and oftentimes case data of certain threats and attack vectors. And we actually published one back in August of last year, and its caption is Connected Education Technology and Mass Data Collection on Student Necessitates Increased Cybersecurity. And I believe this should be available as a resource in the webinar, in the resource section for all to download. And feel free to share with your colleagues and administrators in your organizations.
Okay, great. So yeah, that is the PDF that's available in the additional resources box to the left of everybody's screen. Right.
Yes.
And then you mentioned also that 2/3 of cyber attacks can be attributed to human error, which really underscores not just the importance of technology tools like Robin described, but also user awareness training. That's such a big topic, we could do a webinar on just that alone as well, but if you were to sort of summarize, what would be the key elements that user awareness training should include and hit on?
It should be frequent. I would say at least once per year, and it should be relevant to the threat landscape. So oftentimes we develop, it takes a lot of effort to develop the content, but it's really important that as administrators that we take a holistic look at what the threat landscape is, use all available resources and intelligence from both the private sector and government to develop your own awareness training for your users so that they are aware. And then if and when you are aware of a threat that is targeting your school, make sure that you do give awareness to your users. If there's like a phishing campaign targeting one or more users, let others know so they don't become victimized, therefore allowing the actors to gain access to your network.
Okay, great. This is a question for Robin or Elaine. Do any of your tools encompass data privacy?
So data privacy is actually an aspect of all of our tools, just because there are so many laws and regulations and rules out there that we need to make sure that we are able to adhere to those. So, for example, if you look at over in EMEA, they have very specific rules about privacy. So we include, for example, in the Introspect product, because we can attribute a lot of activity, all the activity actually, to each user and device. We have ways to have analysts only be able to see what's happening and not, whose device that is or who that person is. So all of those types of tools are built into all of our solutions, and we have information about that on our website related to all the products that we have that collect information.
Okay, thanks. We have some participants on the webinar who aren't in IT. They might be librarians or have other roles within school systems. For folks who aren't in IT, what can they do to help improve cybersecurity in their school or district?
This is Chris with the FBI. I think it's important to make sure that you seek out all available resources. The U.S. government has a lot of them. On the U.S. Computer Emergency Response Team page, we often will co-post documents that help promote good cyber hygiene, just basic fundamentals, and then there are some that are more targeted based on the sectors that you operate in.
And probably I would just add to that you really need to consider that, everyone that's connecting to the network is really part of that first line of defense. And you really just need to be aware that it may look like it's, a valid email, but if it's asking you to do something and you kind of get that feeling in your gut that, I don't know if this is right, as Chris mentioned, pick up the phone or try another means to make sure that it is actually right before you do something. Phishing emails today look very real. They're not, from 5 years ago where there's misspellings and you could tell right away. So, just, be aware and, do your part as, being part of that first line of defense.
Okay. Is there a checklist for educators as they try to figure out what they should be doing for cybersecurity in their school or district?
Yeah, so if you reference the private industry notification that's in the reference documents, page 3 actually highlights some best practices that are encouraged for technology and information professionals working in the K-12 environment. Things such as changing passwords, two-factor authentication, some of the things that I mentioned earlier during my presentation.
All right, great, thanks. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of great information here, and this is such a huge topic. If you were to, and this is a question for all the presenters, if you were to try to prioritize like the X number of things that schools should do right now, what should they be and where should they start?
So from my perspective, I would say identify where your crown jewels are on your network and evaluate what you need to protect them. And I would say from there, just prioritize all the resources that you need, because as we know, this is a business decision, and the decision makers in your organization may feel compelled differently, so you have to make the strong argument as to how and why you need to protect your critical data and your assets, and ultimately your students.
Yeah, and I second Chris on the crown jewels. Make sure that you understand what are your most important assets, important people, and make sure that those are adequately and more than adequately protected. The other thing is to really start with your existing infrastructure. Where are you today? What's working? What could be working better? And then look at where are the gaps? Where are the areas of improvement? And look at, how much effort, how many resources, how much funding would it take to fix those? And just, it's a continuous process. It's not just a one-time thing. And as you saw from Chris's presentation, threats are always changing, and so we just need to stay committed to understanding, what's the latest, what's affecting our industry, what's affecting organizations overall, and just do our best.
I would say this, Elaine, from a K-12 perspective, I think there's always needs to be continued training for students, teachers, and for staff on, what happens with cybersecurity and, how to prevent it.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Our time is running short here, so I just want to take a few minutes to wrap things up. If you submitted a question through the Q&A box that we did not have a chance to get to, please note that someone will follow up with you directly. And if you have any other thoughts or questions about anything you heard today, there will be contact information in the follow-up email that you receive for both Chris at the FBI and for Aruba. So I'd like to thank our speakers today, Elaine Shuck and Robin Witty from Aruba and Special Agent Chris Thomas from the FBI for a very informative presentation about a very critical topic. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us today as well. Hopefully you gained some good insight that will help you secure your networks and your data and your users more effectively. So as a reminder, you'll receive an email within the next few days that contains a link to the recording along with the slides. And if you haven't already done so, please also take a minute to download those additional resources that Aruba has provided and the FBI have provided in the bottom left side of your screen. So thanks again, everybody, for participating, and have a great day.